Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm your host, Mansa Musa. We're in the period of Olympics. If we was to deal with the Olympic analysis of my guest today, and we had an event, the event would be watching the police run around the track and see who cheat and get a medal for exposing them. That would be the medal we would get, the medal for exposing police corruption and police brutality and fascism as it relates to the police department. Here, welcome Jan and Taya of the Police Accountability. They're on the Dream Team at the Real News Network, and I'm honored to have y'all here. When we was talking about doing something about Michael Brown, and it's Michael Brown's anniversary, and we was talking about it, and I said, man, maybe we can get Jan and Taya to come in, because it's like the highlight of my doing this is working with y'all and talking to y'all, because y'all, y'all got a depth. One, y'all got a depth, now y'all real cool people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank
All right, so let's start. Okay, so this is the 10th year anniversary of Michael Brown.
Yes.
All right, and we know that what came out of Michael Brown was a civil upheaval of demonstrations all around the country and all around the world. But more importantly, the way it was looking in Washington, D.C., and the way it was looking in the United States, the fact that it was consistent and it was long, and people came out and people made it known that they was tired of police running amok. All right, let's talk about where was y'all at when, and how did y'all cover that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I was still part of the mainstream media, sort of, as you know, at a mainstream media television, actually Sinclair Broadcasting, when the uprising around Michael Brown. So I wasn't able to cover it, but we did end up starting to work here, both of us, when Freddie Gray died in police custody. So we were thinking about, because you had mentioned to us you wanted to talk about how things had evolved over 10 years. And, you know, one of the things that we both thought about when we discussed it was there has been, since Michael Brown and since the subsequent, you know, George Floyd and Freddie Gray, there has been tremendous amount of reform on the civilian side. In other words, you know, even in Maryland, for example, you used to have the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which give police special privileges in the legal system when they do something wrong. That was repealed. And so there have been things that have happened. We have a consent decree in Baltimore, many things that have happened. But I think on the side of policing, in terms of the culture of policing, I don't think that has changed as rapidly as the civilian side of expectations. In other words, you know, for a long time, the idea of police brutality was kind of buried and not, you know, covered. I know as a reporter, when I covered it in the aughts, you know, it was just my word against the police. And now that there have been body camera and things, and there's evidence, and, you know, Taya will talk about that in some specific cases, that makes a different type of, you know, sort of way to process it and to push back against it. However, you know, I think still at this point in the actual bastion of policing, I think some of the same attitudes that create those sort of horrible situations we witness still persist. I think police are still trained to be very violent, to be very suspicious, especially of people of color, and to act out violently preemptively, not as a last resort. Or I don't think any of this talk about like sort of like being able to de-escalate, I don't think that's true. In fact, there was just an article written by Samantha Simon in The Atlantic where she went to 4 different police academy trainings, and what she talked about was how the police are trained to view us, and I mean the people as violent, you know, possible murderers at any second, and how that has persisted. So I think, you know, one of the things Taya and I talked about was like, there have been, you can't say there have not been attempts, and there have not been some real substantive changes, but I think police are still sort of in this back and forth war with us that, you know, that has been precipitated by the culture of policing.
But before I go, let's talk about that, because a point you made, and I think our audience need to really understand this, is like the fact that it has been some changes on the civil side, and that's the society looking for a place where the police represent their model, serve and protect.
Exactly.
But the culture being what it is, how do we make inroads into that
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very difficult because, like, so for example, Taya and I attended the Republican National Convention, and there was a sign, "Back the Blue," right? In the conventioneers were touting these signs. And I think because police have become such a political, have become part of the political process. I mean, one of the things in this country, we try to separate the military from politics because we know that people with guns and badges enforcing political ideologies can be an extremely fraught authoritarian experience. But when you're down in the convention, you turn around, you see all these signs, "Back the Blue," it just makes policing feel like it's in a different realm than where it really should be, which is municipal service. And I think that's a political battle, unfortunately, that is still being fought. And because the Republicans are using it as a kind of a wedge issue, like you still hear this silly, and I would say extremely silly, defund the police mantra, which anyone who knows anything about municipal budgeting, covered cities and policing, police departments have excess funding many times. And you still hear this, they're still throwing out, well, you said defund the police, without ever thinking about, can a municipal agency be held accountable? So the problem is that it's become so political that I think it's going to be hard to change that culture because the police see the support from the right side, from our more, sort of authoritarian side, and they say, well, we need to just embrace this and ratchet up, and we don't need to respond to what the civilian side wants. So I think it's going to be very difficult.
Can I add to that? Because you brought up something really interesting in relation to the way policing is politicized. And it's something that we always joke. Okay, so if somebody from the DPW was supposed to, for the Department of Public Works, was supposed to recycle, and instead of recycling, they took all our recycling and just dumped it somewhere, would we be wrong to criticize them? Would we be attacking the very fabric of society to say, hey, they're supposed to do their job this way and they didn't? No, of course not. That person who took all our recycling and did whatever they wanted with it would probably get reprimanded, if not fired. But if we say, hey, a Baltimore City Police Department has been shooting unarmed people, we have a problem with it, suddenly the politics are involved. Suddenly we are anti-American. Suddenly we're not being patriotic. We're not supporting our boys in blue. Well, wait a second. They are paid by us, the taxpayers. They are supposed to protect and serve. And that police culture that we're talking about, unfortunately, really hasn't changed. And I think we have some really strong signs of that. I mean, I think what we covered with Sergeant Ethan Newberg, that's a Baltimore City police officer, one who was making $239,000 a year.
Right,
okay?
Of taxpayers' money.
Of taxpayer dollars. But thanks to this body-worn camera program that was started in SAO Mosby's office, they were reviewing the body camera video, and they looked at about 6 months worth of it, just 6 months, and they found 9 occasions in which he committed 32 counts of misconduct in office. 32 counts, just 9 occasions in 6 months. Can you imagine what that man was doing before there was a body-worn camera program? Can you imagine all of the crimes he committed against our community that we don't even know about? Guess how much time he spent in jail?
How much?
6 months.
He did no. He got 6 months probation that he could spend at home. Home detention.
Home detention.
Home detention. He didn't even spend a night in jail.
I mean, it's
for
really,
terrorizing our community.
Really kind of
exactly.
It's really kind of interesting because I was just looking at the community report. There's a report, State Senator Jill Carter passed a law that required a certain type of reporting mechanisms for the police department. And what's really interesting about it is right now the Baltimore Police Department in the latest survey has about 2,100 sworn officers, which is about 700 or 800 officers short of their capacity and what they normally are staffed at. However, we are in a year of record, we probably will have a record low homicide rate. We did last year under these the kind of circumstances where there's low police staffing. So what does that tell you? That tells you that this idea, this equation that underlies the whole political argument of police, that more police make us safer, is absolutely false. But it doesn't really get into the political equation. Now in Baltimore, people had a choice. They could have elected Sheila Dixon, who was more the pro-police, or they could have gone with Brandon Scott, who had what was it called, GVSR, or gun?
It was the Gun Violence Reduction.
Which was
safety.
a complete community program, which is really creative with this. And they chose the community program because we've seen this up close. But, really, I think on the broader scale of American politics, this hasn't been digested by people that, you know what, police, your main argument for more police and giving police the powers to do things that are unconstitutional is that we will be safer. There's no proof of it. And Baltimore is a perfect exemplar of the fact that that's just not true. We have less police and less crime. So to the police parsons, I say, explain that to me. Why has that happened? So it's just a very interesting dynamic because it.
And really, the issue underlies is this: is that one, the police is never have been put together as representative of the community. So that's the beginning. There's always been there is to serve and protect and the property interests of corporate America and capitalists. Here we come along and we say, okay, but that's not what your mandates say. That's not what your oath say. So we try to hold you accountable to the things that you're supposed to be doing. But talk about let's walk back. Okay, so we had Rodney King, right? The response to Rodney King was spontaneous rioting, looting, killing, whatever. That was the response because of what people seen, the visual aid of what people seen.
Absolutely.
More importantly, and it was in California. They show you how the relationship between the police and Californians. They acquitted OJ because they said the police. When they interjected the police in this case, it don't make no difference what you did. In their mind, we got empirical evidence and examples of the police being bad. So can't nobody be worse than them in a situation. All right, then we got Trayvon Martin, right? Then we got
Michael Brown.
Right. Then we got Freddie Gray.
Right. Eric Garner.
Eric Garner. Freddie Gray, and then George Floyd.
Right.
Not talking about what's happened in between that.
Because there are a lot of cases.
Right.
On top
Sandra
of that.
Bland in 2015, all of that recorded by the dash camera. It was absolutely heartbreaking.
Right. And in each case, the cry from the public and the masses has been, change the police. Whatever that is, whatever we say that is, we come up with terminology like defund. But when we say defund, train, better training, we come up with a whole host of things that we want to see done around the police. And their response is, and the system and the capitalist response is, okay, we're going to take what you say and we're going to interpret it the way that advances our narrative.
Absolutely.
Ergo, Cop City. Okay, Cop City is, they saying, what they're offering in Cop City is that, we're training police to be better, to better serve and protect. Okay, but going back to your point, Jan, why do you need military-style training?
Right. Well,
why do you need, go ahead.
One thing that Taya and I always, not laugh about, but, we covered very extensively the consent decree between the Baltimore City Police Department and the Department of Justice, which was the result of the uprising after Freddie Gray.
Right.
But what was amazing about it is we both were looked at each other and they're like, they announced $70 million in new funding for the police department. So the police department literally wreaks havoc in the community, creates the conditions in which people felt the need to literally rise up. And their response was, let's give police more money for training, right?
And you know what, when you brought up Cop City, you took the thought right out of my mind, because when you said capitalism, you said policing, and you said, what is the real imperative policing? In the Cop City that they want to create, guess who's funding it?
Yeah.
Guess what? Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Wells Fargo. I mean, if this doesn't show you the tie between capitalism, the protection of property, and what police are really there to do, I don't know what will.
Yeah. So it always is kind of like in these situations, more money doesn't flow to the community, even though community programs are shown to be really more effective. Instead, more money flows to police. No matter what happens, it's kind of like heads I win, tails you lose. More money comes to them in the form of this kind of police reform infrastructure you're talking about. It becomes almost a business opportunity.
It is.
Because there's just so much money available to people who will say, I can help reform the police, or, I forget the police, the thing that, there's...
ROCA?
Yeah, ROCA. Not ROCA per se, but there's just so many organizations and people who can take advantage of the funding that flows to policing. Go ahead.
And the Fraternal Order Police in everywhere, they're like a lobby beyond a lobby, because no matter what goes on, they always going to paint the narrative that we're here to serve and protect, and you taking our ability to do that.
Right.
Bump the fact that we're killing people indiscriminately. Bump the fact that we fabricating cases against. Bump the fact that we taking the fact and manufacturing evidence against people.
Right.
Or like in the case that you talk about, all the misconduct. But the connection is that you're doing this with impunity. So you can take and say like, oh, well, I'm gonna cook the books, or I'm gonna do misappropriate money. And I'm doing it with impunity. But in the interim of me doing that, I was out on the street shaking down people. I got numerous of people arrested. I locked up and swore an oath that what I say they did, and you take me at my word because I'm the police.
Yeah.
But the person that's the real victim of it is the person that you supposed to serve and protect. But let's talk about how the reactions from each one of these periods. Because like I said, in the era of George King, right, the beating, it was riotous. People like literally like was outraged because of what they seen. Right, and it was more the visual than anything else in what they seen. And then when you had Trayvon and you had the other one, you ain't have as much of a reaction in terms of when you got to Michael Brown. Right?
Yeah.
Why do you think that Michael Brown had that type of impact?
I think because, you know, like I just saw from a reporter covering police brutality prior to the cell phone camera and the visuals that you would see, that it was very difficult sometimes. You know, you'd write about really what you knew were horrible police shootings where someone would get shot in the back and you just knew it was wrong, but you didn't have visuals. And I think, you know, in the case of Freddie Gray, you saw Freddie Gray being taken into the van. You know, Michael Brown, you saw his body lying.
Just laying out there.
You know, and Eric Garner, you know, you saw him being
put in that chokehold. All those officers.
I honestly think it's kind of like the civil rights movement of the 60s where video finally could show people, and when people could finally see it, even if it wasn't always directly what happened. I mean, everyone saw Freddie Gray being put in the van on the second stop when he was hogtied. You know, I'd say he was hogtied with handcuffs and thrown into the back like a piece of trash, and then he ended up, you know, hitting his head. But whatever, everyone can see that. When you can see it, I think it has a bigger effect, and the cell phone cameras were instrumental just as much as a body camera.
Absolutely. Cell phone cameras, CCTV footage, and now finally body-worn camera are one of the most important tools that this civil rights movement has. Because just like you were talking about the Fraternal Order of Police, they're often arguing the Constitution is getting in the way of our cops doing good policing. It's getting in the way of it.
That's an oxymoron.
And so it's ironic, that idea, well, you're going to have to bend and even break the law to be able to uphold it and be able to serve it. And so when you talk about, I mean, when you were talking about in Ferguson, I think that moment where you saw him go he had his hands up and he said, don't shoot. And we saw that he had nothing in either hand, and that officer still gunned him down anyway. And I think the visual of that, the visual of seeing Eric Garner have 6 officers on him with one in a chokehold, and knowing that all he was doing was selling some loose cigarettes, and they're on top of him like that. And you can tell he's a big man. He's, you know, he's got breathing issues. You could tell that they were harming him. You could tell that he's saying, I can't breathe. And so I think seeing those moments on camera in the same way that you mentioned with the 60s civil rights movement, I think it's when those images from Vietnam came home they saw little children being harmed, being devastated by war. When they saw those images, that really helped motivate people. In the same way, seeing those images of African Americans being unarmed and being harmed and gunned down, people really started to understand that what we had been saying all along was true, that these officers were killing our people.
And you know, to your point, I mean, the one case that really influenced Maryland's legislation, where most of the legislative action was not actually Freddie Gray, but George Floyd, because visually speaking, George Floyd was so direct and graphic and so unambiguous. And I mean, it ended up actually exposing our corrupt medical examiner, ruling in favor of police, Dr. David Fowler, because he ended up testifying that George Floyd did not die from positional asphyxiation, but rather the tailpipe that was next to him.
Yes, it was carbon monoxide. This is what our medical examiner, the medical examiner we had over 20 years, the one we had here, the same one who ruled that the death of Tawanda Jones's brother, Tyrone West, was accidental and due to him having a heart condition. It had nothing to do with the police officers that body slammed him on the ground. The death of Anton Black down in Greensboro, Maryland, a 19-year-old young man that was a track star. And you can see in the body camera video these big officers sitting on top of him. And they said, oh, he died because he had a heart abnormality. Yeah. That's the type of rulings that Dr. David Fowler gave. So when he went in front of the entire country in that courtroom and testified that it wasn't positional asphyxiation, the police officers were not a contributing factor, that the fact that he had drugs in his system and that the police, the car tailpipe was near him, that was most likely carbon monoxide poisoning that contributed to his death. And literally over 400 pathologists and medical examiners around the country said, you need to audit this guy. You need to audit him. They signed a petition.
I guess my point was that George Floyd, I think, from our perspective of covering policing, had the greatest impact on, you know, legislation and just change. Right. So that's why I would say it's the visual component that makes the difference.
And I think, you know, and the thing about George Floyd, like unlike the other ones, was, like you say, the visual aid, but it went national, it went worldwide. But this is the problem. This was an issue with it. Only way you wasn't affected by, you ain't had no conscience. That's the only. I don't care what station of life, where you at in your politics. I don't care who you you know, like, yeah, I'm all for Trump, but I can't be for that. Yeah. You know, and because it was so graphic.
Yes.
And that's what caused the reaction, because in that reaction, and I want y'all to speak to this, in that reaction, you had the movement, Black Lives Matter. Yeah. You had a more strategic push. You didn't have, which led to like legislation or led to people's conscience trying to talk about it more so than anywhere else. And so why do you think that at this stage right now, we know we had that, we know we seen that, we know we seen the upheaval, but at this stage right now, the problem hasn't changed. They just killed, they shot a boy in the back in Baltimore City, and go back to what I think what you say, Taya, is that or if you, Jan, where they say like the training was to look at us as being, look at first, it ain't a matter of me what I'm doing. It's a matter of like you in my view, running with your back away from me, but in my training say you a threat. Yeah. Or I gotta subdue you to stop you from being a potential threat. And the way I do that is I kill you.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a couple things, because, for example, just so people understand, despite all these reforms, in 2017, 981 civilians were shot and killed by police. In 2023, it was 1,161. Yeah. So it has continued to increase, unfortunately. And I think a lot of this, I mean, I think what we have to understand, there's this idea that Taya and I wrestle with all the time about police corruption, because the idea being that there's this police force that if you just reform them to a certain extent, they will suddenly be good or whatever. But I think what's more important to understand is that policing just reflects the underlying problems with the society that it purports to serve. In other words, you know, Baltimore City, the way Baltimore City is economically and racially constituted, the way Baltimore City violated the rights of African Americans, all those things were reflected in the policing. So unless you reform society's corrupt, and as you pointed out, like the idea that property is more important than human life. Yeah. Unless you reform those elements, policing is always going to be responsive to the power and the corrupt power of the society in which it is situated. So, I mean, I think that's what is very difficult about this reform problem, because you really can't just say you're going to be able to, in isolation, reform police if the society or the city or the county or the country in which this policing is situated is not reformed first. I think policing will continue to be mimetically reflecting what is going on in that society, what perverse incentives are, what racial problems are, will always be reflected in policing.
You know, I just wanted to, this conversation's got me thinking about so many different things. Right. And when you were, we're talking about these lethal uses of force, and I was thinking of Sonia Massey, 36-year-old woman, Springfield, Illinois. Come on now. Right? Come on. You see her, she calls police because she believes there's been an intruder around her home. She calls 911 for help. Officers go take a look around. They see a car that's had its windows broken into, so perhaps she was right. Perhaps there had been an intruder around her home. She comes to the door and she's just wearing a bathrobe, and you can tell that she has no armaments on her whatsoever. The officer goes very close to her and speaks to her, but then insists that he needs to see a form of ID. So that's when she's like, well, I have to go in the house and look for it. When we get to the point where he says to her, turn that pot of hot water off, I don't want to fire, she says, okay. And she goes over there. Until that moment, they have been, somewhat laughing and joking together. And she goes over there and she makes a comment. He's like, get that hot water. And she's like, oh, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And he's like, I will shoot you. I will shoot you in your effing face. And he immediately pulls the gun up. And I reported on this, and I had people say, well, it's possible she threw that water in his direction. And I was looking at the distance. There was a counter between her and them. And I was like, no one said at any point, they could have left. They could have backed away. Yeah. What happened to de-escalation?
We have all that. Yeah, we have all that. Yeah.
Although personally, from what I saw of the body camera video, I do not believe at any point she was genuinely threatening either one of those officers with that pot of hot water. If they truly believed that what was occurring, they should have retreated. There was no reason to shoot an unarmed woman in her face 3 times and then not give medical aid. It's absolutely incredible.
And that go back to something you said earlier. They're being trained to be assassins. They're occupying forces in our community. They're being trained. They're not being. De-escalation is like a no. De-escalation in their mind is like a problem. It's problematic for them because they in gaining control. If I can gain control by de-escalate, but that's not control for them. Control for them is I'll kill somebody, and the threat of me will shoot you and kill you. It'll help you de-escalate, get out my face. Because like you say, when Sonya Massey, it was no threat there. When you running away from the police, when you running away, it's only in a movie with somebody running from the police and shooting back like this is, and the police get hit. That's only in the movie. But when you running away from the police, I don't care what you got. When you run away from the police, the bare act of running away saying, I'm trying to get away. So in your mind, what do that mean? That means that you're trying to hurt me? But let's talk about the reforms and how they're not being implemented or how they're being played. Because we know right now George Floyd bill hasn't been passed. Right. And
the George Floyd Act, yes.
George Floyd hasn't been. And every time something come up with the woman signing mask, look, we need to sign the George Floyd. We need to sign the George.
That bill died in 2021. It died in Congress. And you know what? That bill was so reasonable that they're saying, hey, let's codify that there should be no chokeholds. Hey, let's codify that there shouldn't be no-knock warrants. Hey, you know what? Let's stop the 1033 program and stop giving small-town police officers bearcats and literal tanks to police their communities with. There was not a thing in there that would be considered radical. Just some really reasonable reforms, and it died. And so with all the public outcry, with all the pressure, the organizing, the activism, and like you said, we have the body camera that shows exactly what happened. They still couldn't get that bill passed.
One program that strikes me as very interesting that's worth thinking about in the context of this discussion is the Safe Streets program in Baltimore. Because I've watched it evolve from having absolutely no dedicated funding to kind of growing and getting some state dedicated funding. But throughout that process, there's been this pushback from police partisans, specifically through our local Sinclair Broadcasting affiliate, which is continually questioned and continually push back and question, the spending, which is minuscule compared to police. But the main component that I think that the police partisans don't like and is revealing, I think, is the fact that Safe Streets is not an armed force. It is supposed to be de-escalation. It is people in the community who are trained and who have knowledge of the community to simply de-escalate, not shoot anybody, not put anybody in handcuffs. It's really supposed to be a community mediation program. I don't know how you feel about it, but I always, with the people that I interviewed or participated in the program, struck me as extremely courageous and, dealing with very difficult circumstances. And I thought it was really interesting that a program that was really saying, we don't need guns and badges and arrests. We need members of the community who are empowered to mediate. I was always interesting that places like Fox 45, Sinclair, the people who have been very police focused, found it to be threatening. What is threatening about mediation exactly?
And the guy and the person that started, Leon Farouk, we was locked up together. When he got out, he created that concept for
that's amazing.
For the purpose of making the community safe right? And educating the community how to interact with the police, and but more importantly, to get the police involved in the community and understanding the community.
Right.
So what they did over the years, like you said, you get this pushback, then you vilify some of the people that's in it.
You vilify people, they definitely did
so
that.
now you're saying you take the focus off of the work that they're doing to the individuals that's involved in the group. But going forward, how do y'all see this playing out in terms of, because we know that right now it's shifting, because I know in D.C., when they passed their last bill, Safe Street or whatever, she put in there about chokeholds. You know, they passed a part about, but you know, you can choke them, but you just can't choke them. You can't put this on them. You can put this on them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a different hand gesture. You can't choke them with an L. Just choke them with both of your hands, and it's not lethal. So, but I guarantee you, when you look back over all these cities that mainly with the uptick of what they call crime, that they have went back and undid a lot of the common sense.
I agree.
Reforms.
But, you know, I mean, I think there needs to be a reckoning with what is evolving in Baltimore, where you have a large reduction in violent crime like police, but shootings and homicides, and yet you have fewer and fewer police. And we as media need to force people to reconcile with that, to answer the questions about that, because the narrative that has driven the excesses and abuse of police that we have seen is the narrative that more policing somehow means more safety, or allowing, as Taya mentioned, allowing police to ignore constitutional rights, or constitutional rights are a barrier to good policing and safety, and all these things. All these things are absolutely hinge upon the fact that somehow unleashing a militarized force in a civilian society can somehow make it safer. We as media have to really, really push that question and question that underlying assumption. It is so important, and it really frustrates me because no one asks that question. It's right there in black and white. The Baltimore Police Department is staffed at historically low levels. Why are homicides going down? Well, it's because the Mayor Scott, and I'll give him credit for that, invested in community-oriented it's violence intervention programs, not because of the police. And we need to, if we can dislodge policing from that, idea that somehow they're the barrier between civilization and chaos, I think we'll go a long way to getting real police reform.
Yeah, I agree.
But the other part of that, the discussion about how media should handle this is that when we report on police misconduct, we can't have the public or the government come out to kill the messenger. And the example I would want to give of that is when we were covering Sergeant Ethan Newberg. He's the officer I mentioned earlier, making over $250,000 a year for literally terrorizing our community. We sat in that courtroom and watched him read, I would say, what was a less than heartfelt apology to the victims of his criminal misconduct against them. And during that speech, he was looking over at us and he mentioned, "I don't think I would be standing here today if it wasn't for certain members of social media." And he looked over at us a couple times, and Stephen said, "He's looking at us." And I'm like, "No, he's not. You're just being paranoid." And he's like, "No, he's looking at us." After he was, told that he was going to get just 6 months home detention, another reporter came up to us and was like, "Well, what'd you do? Kick his dog? Why'd he keep looking at you like that?" And the thing I realized is that he blamed us. It was our coverage that put him in that position, not his unconstitutional behavior. And there are members of the public that feel that way, that if we highlight a police officer doing harm against the community, that we're creating a problem. It's the officers who are breaking the law, who are harming the community that are causing the problem. So that's the other thing, that when you are a member of the media and you do step out and you do, say the truth and you speak it out and you show the body camera footage and you give the victim side of the story, people turn on us and say, "You're making it worse." And we're saying, "No, you guys need to clean this up."
As we close out, y'all got the last word. We can start with you, Janis.
Well, no, I mean, again, I think police reform will not really occur unless you see fundamental shifts in the way we discuss things like violence and poverty, and unless we address those underlying issues. Police is a really simple solution for late stage capitalism to suppress people's political efficacy and suppress their ability to say, you know, this is wrong. I shouldn't be going broke because I can't pay my medical bills. All those things are intertwined. And I think if we recognize that, that is where the real reform will occur, recognizing police role that we talk about a lot in our show in the inequality equation and in enforcing racial boundaries. That has to be discussed and fleshed out in order for real reform to occur.
The only thing I would add to that is the fact that the culture of policing is a serious problem. And it's not just Dave Grossman's warrior cop training or his philology training or the New Jersey street cop training, which I would suggest anyone look up what those events look like. That street cop training was absolutely insane. You can understand why police would go out and just be terrible to the community after attending an event like that. But that the culture of policing, I think the best way to think of it is what we saw with George Floyd. That veteran officer kneeling on Floyd's neck and the two other officers just going along with it. Just going along with it. Not one of them spoke up and said, well, maybe, you know, we should render some aid now. Maybe we should stop. They went along with it. So as long as the veteran cops keep on replicating this unconstitutional, to say the least, style of policing, we're going to continue to get it. So we have to attack the heart of this police culture, or we will continue to get the same results.
There you have it. Rattling the Bars, real news. We have to attack the culture. As Jan said, you have low homicide incidents in Baltimore City and a low police force. That means that whatever the alternatives are doing, they're working in terms of making the community safe. So why are we not investing in that? Or why do we continue to invest in a police force as an occupying force in our community? We need to answer these questions. As this is the 10th year anniversary of Michael Brown, we recognize that some changes have been made, but more importantly, the biggest change that's being made is the consciousness of the community and people becoming more and more aware of police. And this is because of people like Taya and Janis in the Police Accountability Report. Thank y'all for...
Thank you so much for having us.
Great.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching The Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please, tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to The Real News Network. Solidarity forever.